Listen carefully. What you lost was never the end of your story. It was a setup for a greater revelation. God does not merely replace what was taken. He restores in ways that make the pain worth surviving. And when heaven restores, it never looks like what you expected. Loss has a way of changing how you see yourself. It can strip away confidence. And silence your voice. It can make you question everything. You start asking dangerous questions. Why did this happen? Why me? Where was God? Then if you are not careful, you will build your identity around what disappeared. You will call yourself abandoned. You will call yourself forgotten. You will call yourself broken. But hear me carefully. What left your life did not take your value with it. A person can walk away. Money can vanish. Opportunities can collapse. Dreams can shatter. Yet none of these things have the authority to redefine you, because your value was never in what you possessed. It was always in who created you. Enemy wants you to confuse loss with worthlessness. That is the strategy. If he cannot destroy your destiny, he will attempt to distort your identity. He will whisper lies. You had your chance. You will never recover. This is how your story ends. But the devil is a poor historian. He always forgets what God has done before. He forgot about Joseph, sold, betrayed, forgotten. Yet the pit was not permanent. The prison was not permanent. And your current season is not permanent either. You are not buried. You are planted. There is a difference. Burial is an ending. Planting is preparation. One looks like death. The other produces life. And sometimes they look exactly the same. That is why faith is necessary. Because restoration rarely begins with visible evidence. It begins with invisible conviction. God often allows subtraction before multiplication. He removes what cannot remain. He shakes what cannot stand. He exposes what cannot survive the future he has prepared. And in that moment that feels cruel, but it is actually mercy. Imagine carrying yesterday's limitations into tomorrow's calling. Imagine dragging expired relationships into eternal assignments. Imagine entering your next season with the wrong people, the wrong mindset, and the wrong attachments. God loves you too much for that. So he permits separation. He allows pruning. He tolerates temporary pain to secure permanent fruit. A tree does not cry because dead branches are cut away. It grows stronger. And so will you. Do you think you lost everything? But what if you only lost what was no longer qualified to go with you? That changes everything. Because restoration is not about returning you to where you were. God has no interest in taking you backward. He moves forward, always. He restores by advancing. He heals by transforming. He rebuilds by enlarging. That is why the restored version of your life will not look like the original. It will be better, stronger, wiser, purified. What was stolen exposed your dependency. What was removed revealed your foundations. What collapsed uncovered your true source. And now something remarkable can happen. You can stop trusting the gift more than the giver. Many people love blessings. Few truly know the blesser. Loss introduces you to him in ways prosperity never could. In abundance, you praise him for what he gives. In loss, you discover who he is. Provider, protector, restorer, redeemer, not theory. Reality, you do not really know God as a healer until something hurts. You do not really know him as a provider until resources run dry. You do not really know him as a restorer until restoration becomes necessary. This is why some of your deepest pain will produce your greatest revelation. And revelation changes everything. Because once you know God differently, you trust him differently. You pray differently. You walk differently. You expect differently. Loss can either shrink you or stretch you. The choice is yours. Some people become bitter. Others become better. Some retreat. Others rise. Some worship their wounds. Others weaponize their testimony. Which will you become? This season is asking you that question. Not politely, urgently. You cannot control what happened, but you can control what happens in you. And what happens in you will determine what happens next. God is not merely restoring possessions. He is restoring perspective. Because if he gave you everything back without changing your mind, you would lose it again. Restoration requires capacity. Capacity requires growth. Growth often requires pain. That is the hidden mathematics of heaven. Nothing is wasted. Not the tears, not the betrayal, not the waiting, not the silence. God recycles pain into purpose. He converts wounds into wisdom. He turns scars into credentials. One day, the very thing that nearly destroyed you will become proof that God preserved you. People will ask how you survived, how you stood, how you rebuilt. And your answer will be simple. God restored me, not partially, not eventually, completely. But before He restored my circumstances, He restored me. That is the first miracle. And without it, no other miracle can last. So stop measuring your future by your losses. Stop introducing yourself through your disappointments. Stop rehearsing what died. You are not your last heartbreak. You are not your last failure. You are not your last closed door. You are the evidence of divine resilience. You are still here, still breathing, still believing, still chosen. That alone should terrify every force that fought against you. Because if you survive the loss, imagine what you will do with the restoration. And trust me, it is coming. There is something about God that most people never understand. He does not restore according to your expectations. He restores according to His nature, and His nature is abundance. That is why what is coming will confuse your memory. You have been praying for replacement. God has been preparing. Increase. You have been asking Him to return what was taken. He has been designing something greater. Because heaven never copies yesterday. It creates tomorrow. That is why the restored version of your life cannot look exactly like the one you lost. If it did, it would not be restoration. It would only be repetition. And God did not preserve you for repetition. He preserved you for elevation. Think about Job. He lost everything. Wealth, family, health, reputation. His world collapsed in a single season. People around him assumed the story was over. Even his closest voices became sources of pain. But God was not absent. He was silent. And silence is not abandonment. Silence is often construction. A builder does not announce every nail. He simply keeps building. While Job was weeping, heaven was working. While Job was questioning, God was preparing. While Job sat in ashes, restoration was already moving toward him. That is where many people miss the miracle. They think restoration begins when they can see it. Restoration begins the moment God decides it. And once God decides, nothing can prevent it. Not delays, not opposition, not human resistance, not even your own doubts. Because divine decisions outrank earthly circumstances. You may feel forgotten, but heaven has not misplaced your file. Your name is still before God. Your tears are still counted. Your prayers are still alive. Every cry you released in private has been recorded in eternity. Nothing was ignored. Nothing was wasted. Nothing slipped through His hands. And now the season is shifting. Can you sense it? There is movement you cannot yet see. Doors are opening in rooms you have never entered. Conversations are happening without your presence. Favor is arranging itself around your future. People you have never met are being positioned for your benefit. This is how God works. He restores behind the scenes before He restores in front of the crowd. The roots grow long before the fruit appears. That is why impatience is dangerous. It causes people to dig up seeds they should have trusted. God is never late. He operates outside the prison of human clocks. What feels delayed to you is perfectly timed to Him. A blessing too early can become a burden. A relationship too early can become destruction. An opportunity too early can become disaster. Timing protects purpose, and God protects what belongs to Him. You may have lost years, but God can restore years, not just things, years. About that. Years of struggle, years of regret, years of wandering, years of believing you were too late. Yet God specializes in recovering time. He can do in 1 year what should have taken 10. He can accelerate what seemed impossible. He can compress seasons. He can make one moment repay decades. That is not motivation. That is divine law. When God restores, He restores with multiplication. The locust may consume, but locusts do not get the final word. God does. Always. The enemy can interrupt. He cannot conclude. He can attack. He cannot author. He can wound. He cannot determine your ending. Only God has that authority. And God writes redemption into every chapter surrendered to Him. That means your losses are not loose ends. They are setups. They are unfinished paragraphs awaiting divine completion. You thought the chapter ended in tragedy. God calls it a transition. You thought the door slammed shut forever. God calls it redirection. You thought you were being rejected. God was refining your access. What left was necessary. What stayed was essential. What is coming is extraordinary. And here is the beautiful part. God often restores through channels you never anticipated. A stranger may become the answer. A delay may become the doorway. A disappointment may become the introduction. The thing that made no sense may suddenly explain everything. That is why you must remain open. Do not demand that God restore you only through familiar methods. He is too creative for that. He may not use the person who hurt you. He may not reopen the door that closed. He may not rebuild the exact life you remember. He may build one so much better that you stop missing the old one. That is true restoration. Not returning you to the past, liberating you from needing it. One day you will thank God for prayers He refused, for doors He locked, for people He removed, for seasons He ended. Because hindsight is where wisdom often speaks loudest. The pain will make sense. Waiting will make sense. The tears will make sense. Not because they were pleasant, but because they were productive. You cannot always judge a season by how it feels. Winter feels lifeless, yet roots are deepening. Strength is forming. Preparation is happening underground, and underground work always precedes visible growth. So do not despise hidden seasons. God does His finest work where applause cannot reach. He develops greatness in obscurity. He prepares kings in caves. He trains leaders in wilderness. He restores souls in silence. Your hidden season is not punishment. It is preparation. You are not being overlooked. You are being equipped. And when the appointed time arrives, what God reveals publicly will reflect what He developed privately. Then people will call you fortunate. They will call you blessed. They will call you lucky. But they will not know the nights you cried, the battles you fought, the prayers you whispered when no one was watching. They will only see the restoration. They will not see the construction. That is often how miracles look from the outside. Sudden. But heaven knows better. Nothing God does is accidental. Nothing He restores is random. And nothing He promises will fail. So lift your eyes. Raise your expectation. Stop preparing for permanent loss. Start preparing for supernatural recovery. Because when God restores, He does not ask permission from your past. He simply speaks. And what was impossible becomes inevitable. The greatest mistake you can make after loss is this: waiting for restoration while thinking exactly the same way. That never works. God can place opportunity before you, but if your mind still lives in yesterday, you will walk right past tomorrow. Restoration begins in the spirit, but it must take root in the mind. Your life cannot consistently rise above the level of your thinking. That is a law. If you still see yourself as defeated, you will sabotage victory. If you still believe scarcity owns you, abundance will frighten you. If you still identify with rejection, healthy relationships will feel suspicious. This is why some people receive blessings they cannot sustain. They change locations. They never change perspectives. And perspective determines capacity. God will not pour new wine into old mindsets. It would be wasted. You must become compatible with what you are praying for. Read that again with your soul. Compatibility, not just desire. Many people desire restoration. Few prepare for it. You say you want increase. Can you manage it? You say you want influence. Can you carry it? You say you want another chance. Have you become the person who can honor it? These questions matter because God restores responsibly. He does not merely satisfy emotions. He establishes stewardship. A restored life requires a renewed mind, and renewal is not automatic. It is intentional. You must reject the vocabulary of defeat. No more saying, nothing ever works for me. No more rehearsing failure. No more worshiping disappointment. Words are seeds. And you will eventually live in the harvest of what you repeatedly say. Speak death long enough, and your courage will obey. Speak life long enough, and your spirit will rise. This is not positive thinking. This is spiritual alignment. Your words should agree with God's intentions. He calls you restored before you see restoration. He calls you whole while healing is still happening. He calls you blessed while the bank account is still empty. Why? Because heaven speaks from completion, not from appearance. Faith does not deny facts. It denies their authority to define the final outcome. That changes how you walk, how you pray, how you wait. Waiting with expectation feels different than waiting with fear. One prepares, the other panics. Which one are you doing? Because restoration often arrives disguised as responsibility. And unprepared people miss prepared opportunities. Joseph interpreted dreams in prison before he managed a nation in the palace. David learned courage with lions before facing Goliath. Private discipline always precedes public promotion. Always. If God restored everything today, would your character be ready? That question is uncomfortable. Good. Truth often is. God cares less about making you comfortable than making you complete. Comfort can weaken you. Completion strengthens you. And strength is necessary for what comes next. You cannot carry tomorrow's blessing with yesterday's habits. The old you would break under the weight of the new assignment. That is why transformation is not optional. It is essential. Stop asking only for open doors. Ask for enlarged shoulders. Ask for greater wisdom. Ask for stronger discipline. Ask for the maturity to handle what you once mishandled. Because restoration is not merely recovery. It is upgrade. And upgrades require expansion. There are rooms God wants to place you in. Conversations He wants you to lead. Resources He wants you to steward. Lives He wants you to impact. But you must think like the person who belongs there. Not the person who barely survived yesterday. That version of you served its purpose. Honor it. Then release it. You are not called to remain a memorial to your pain. You are called to become a testimony of God's power. There is a difference. A memorial keeps people staring backward. A testimony pulls people forward. Which one will your life become? The answer depends on what you do now. Not next year. Now. Change your internal language. Refuse mental poverty. Refuse spiritual laziness. Refuse emotional dependency on old wounds. Your past may explain you. It must never imprison you. God is not consulting your history to determine your future. He is consulting His purpose. And His purpose outranks your past every single time. This is why shame must go. Shame changes you to expired versions of yourself. Conviction leads to change. Shame leads to hiding. One comes from God, the other does not. Release what God has already forgiven. Drop what heaven no longer holds against you. You cannot receive with closed hands. And guilt keeps hands closed. Open them. Expect again. Believe again. Trust again. Yes, you were hurt. Yes, you were disappointed. Yes, some doors collapsed. But those experiences were chapters. They were not your identity. Your identity is not victim. Your identity is not failure. Your identity is not abandoned. Your identity is redeemed, restored, chosen, equipped, favored. When that becomes real to you, everything shifts. You stop begging for scraps. You stop chasing validation. You stop fearing rejection. Why? Because you know who you are. And people who know who they are do not negotiate with insecurity. They walk in authority, quiet authority, unshakable authority, the kind that comes from divine certainty. That is what God is building in you right now, not arrogance. Authority, not pride. Confidence, not entitlement. Alignment. And aligned people recognize restored seasons when they arrive. They do not shrink from them. They step into them boldly, gratefully, fully. Because they understand this simple truth. God did not preserve them merely to survive. He preserved them to reign. Your restoration will require a new mind, a stronger spirit, a higher expectation. Develop them now. Because what is coming will demand all of you. There are losses that happen because life is broken. And there are losses that happen because God is building. Learn the difference. Not every closed door is an attack. Not every delay is the devil. Not every ending is destruction. Sometimes God removes what you would never have released on your own. That is love even when it hurts. A surgeon cuts to heal. A farmer prunes to increase. A teacher tests to reveal. And God removes to prepare. The pain of pruning is real. Branches do not celebrate the blade, but fruit always honors it. You cannot ask for increase while resisting the process that creates it. That would be like praying for muscles while avoiding resistance. Strength grows through tension. Character grows through testing. Faith grows through waiting. Restoration grows through surrender. This is where many people struggle. They want God to restore what He intentionally removed. They keep returning to doors heaven has permanently closed. They keep revisiting seasons that no longer exist. They keep mourning things God has already buried. But resurrection only belongs to what God chooses. Not everything lost should be recovered. Some things had to die. Some relationships had expiration dates. Some opportunities were too small for your future. Some versions of you were never meant to survive this season. And that is good news. Because if the old you had remained, the new you could never emerge. Transformation always costs something. Always. A seed cannot become a tree while remaining a seed. Identity must break before destiny can bloom. That cracking you feel, that pressure, that discomfort, it is not evidence that you are falling apart. It is evidence that you are breaking open. And there is a world of difference. People fear change because they mistake familiarity for safety. But familiar does not always mean fruitful. You can be comfortable and still be trapped. You can be secure and still be stagnant. God loves you too much to let comfort become your cage. So he disturbs what you settled for. He interrupts what you normalized. He dismantles what cannot support your calling. At first it feels cruel. Later it feels merciful. Eventually it feels brilliant. That is the wisdom of God. He sees what you cannot. He knows what you would choose if you understood what he understands. That alone should calm your spirit. You are being led by omniscience, not guesswork, not chance, not luck. Omniscience. The God who formed galaxies is managing your restoration. He has not lost control because your plans changed. He was never dependent on your plans to begin with. His purpose does not panic. It adjusts, it redirects, it prevails, always. Sometimes the greatest restoration is not getting something back. It is getting yourself back. The version of you that laughed freely, trusted deeply, dreamed boldly, believed without apology. Loss can fragment the soul. It can make you smaller, more guarded, more cynical. But God restores souls. He heals the invisible fractures. He repairs what nobody else can even see. That is why external restoration without internal healing is dangerous. You can regain the house and still lose peace. Recover the money and still live in fear. Find new love and still sabotage intimacy. God aims deeper. He restores from the inside out. He begins where human eyes cannot reach, in the heart, in the mind, in the secret places. That is where real miracles happen. Long before they become visible, do not rush this process. A rushed foundation produces fragile buildings. And God is not building something temporary. He is building something enduring, storm-resistant, pressure-tested, future-ready. The next season of your life must survive more than applause. It must survive opposition, responsibility, influence, success. That requires depth. And depth is always developed in hidden places. Roots first, fruit later. That order cannot be reversed. If it is, collapse becomes inevitable. So if God is taking his time, thank him. Quick construction often means weak construction. Divine patience is protection. You may not understand the pacing. You can trust the builder. He has never abandoned a project he began, not once. And you are his workmanship, his masterpiece, his assignment. The enemy saw your potential and attacked your confidence. But God saw your potential and allowed your training. Two forces were active. One sought destruction. The other guaranteed development. Guess which one wins? Not the loudest, the highest. And there is no authority above God. None. So stop interpreting every loss as punishment. Some losses are promotions in disguise. Some endings are invitations. Some departures are divine escorts out of limitation. What left created space. Space for growth. Space for peace. Space for alignment. Space for what truly belongs. You cannot fill a full cup. You cannot furnish a crowded room. You cannot receive while clinging. Release is not weakness. It is wisdom. Let go of what no longer carries God's grace. Stop trying to resurrect expired seasons. Trust the pruning. Trust the silence. Trust the separation. And above all, trust the restorer. Because the God who removes certain things is the same God preparing better things. He does not subtract without purpose. He does not empty without intending to fill. He does not close without planning another opening. He is strategic, intentional, perfect. And what he is preparing for you cannot be ruined by what he removed from you. That is why peace is possible, even now. especially now, because you are not losing. You are making room. There is a moment in every season of loss when heaven asks a dangerous question. Do you trust me or only what I gave you? That question exposes everything. It reveals whether your faith was anchored in God or attached to the gifts of God. Anyone can praise when the table is full. Anyone can worship when doors are opening. Anyone can trust when the numbers look good. But when the job disappears, when the relationship ends, when the plan collapses, that is where faith is tested. And tested faith becomes trusted faith. God is not trying to hurt you. He is trying to reveal you to yourself. Because until pressure comes, potential remains theoretical. A tea bag never knows its strength until hot water arrives. Neither do you. You may think you are weak. Loss will prove otherwise. You may think your faith is small. Adversity will stretch it. You may think you cannot endure. Yet here you are, still standing, still breathing, still believing. That alone is evidence of supernatural strength. The enemy underestimated what God placed inside you. And perhaps so did you. But struggle has a way of introducing you to hidden reserves, capacities you never knew existed, courage you never planned to need, wisdom you could only learn through pain. That is why some battles are not obstacles. They are revelations. They reveal your depth, your resilience, your spiritual authority. You discover that you can survive things you once feared. And once you know that, fear loses its grip permanently. The storm did not merely test you, it trained you. That changes how you see everything. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you begin asking, what is this producing in me? That question unlocks growth. Pain without reflection creates bitterness. Pain with reflection creates wisdom. Choose wisely. Because wisdom is one of God's favorite forms of restoration. He does not only restore what was lost externally, He restores internally through understanding. Suddenly patterns become clear. Mistakes become teachers. Failures become instructions. You begin to see why certain doors had to close, why certain people had to leave, why certain seasons had to end. And clarity heals wounds that time alone never could. One revelation can close 1,000 emotional leaks. That is the power of divine perspective. You no longer grieve the same way. You no longer fear the same way. You no longer cling the same way. Because understanding has changed your posture, and posture matters. A person bent over by disappointment cannot clearly see approaching opportunity. Lift your head, not because life has been easy, but because God is still faithful. Faithfulness is not measured by the absence of trouble. It is measured by God's presence through it. He was there when you cried. He was there when you doubted. He was there when you almost gave up. He was there when nobody else understood. And He is here now. That should settle your soul. You are not navigating restoration alone. One who promised it is walking with you, step by step, moment by moment, breath by breath. And His track record is flawless. He has never failed, not once. People fail, systems fail, plans fail. God does not. That truth becomes an anchor, especially when emotions are unstable, because feelings are poor leaders, excellent indicators, terrible leaders. Lead with truth, not temporary emotions. Your emotions may say, it's over. Truth says, God is still writing. Your emotions may say, nothing is changing. Truth says, seeds grow in silence. Your emotions may say, you have lost too much. Truth says, God restores beyond measure. Which voice will you follow? The answer determines your future. Faith is not blind optimism. It is disciplined agreement with God's character. It remembers, it recalls, it rehearses His faithfulness. David did not face Goliath based on hope alone. He faced him with history, the lion, the bear, the victories nobody applauded. Your private victories matter. They become public confidence. Remember what God has already done, not to live in the past, but to build faith for the future. The God who sustained you then will restore you now. His methods may differ. His faithfulness will not. And when restoration finally appears, it will not feel random. It will feel familiar. Because the same hand that carried you through loss will place restoration into your hands. You will recognize His fingerprints on the opportunity, on the relationship, on the provision, on the peace. And when you do, gratitude will flood your soul, not just for the blessing, but for the journey. Because by then you will understand something profound. The greatest gift was never what you lost. It was who you became while waiting for restoration. Patient, stronger, wiser, deeper, more aligned, more dependent on God, less impressed by temporary things. That transformation cannot be purchased. It must be forged, and forged things last. So do not despise the fire. It is creating permanence. It is producing purity. It is preparing glory. The version of you emerging from this season will astonish the version that entered it. And when that day comes, you will realize God was not only restoring your life, He was upgrading your soul. There is a law in the kingdom that cannot be broken. Whatever God restores, He restores with purpose, not for comfort alone, not for applause, not so you can simply admire the blessing. He restores so you can become a vessel, channel, a testimony, a solution. Your restoration is bigger than your relief. It carries assignment. That is why the enemy fought you so fiercely. He was never just after your money, never just after your peace, never just after your relationships. He was after your influence. Because a restored person is dangerous. A healed person cannot be manipulated by the same wounds. A delivered person cannot be imprisoned by the same chains. A restored person becomes proof, and proof has power. People may doubt your words. They cannot deny your transformation. When they see what God has done in you, arguments become irrelevant. Restoration preaches louder than sermons ever could. Think about it. The places where you were broken will become the places where you were most effective. The wounds that once embarrassed you will become doors through which others find healing. The tears you cried in private will water the lives of people you have never even met. That is how redemption works. God never wastes pain. He repurposes it. He weaponizes it. He turns it into ministry. And ministry is simply your healed life serving others. You do not need a platform to have impact. You need authenticity. You need scars that have become stories. You need wounds that no longer bleed when touched. That is where authority lives. Not in theory, in experience. Anyone can quote principles. Few can embody them. But once you have walked through loss, survived betrayal, endured waiting, and encountered God's restoration, your words carry weight. Why? Because truth sounds different in the mouth of someone who has lived it. That is you, or rather, that is who you are becoming. Every setback has been training. Every delay has been education. Every disappointment has been preparation. God has been building credibility into your spirit. One day, someone will sit across from you, shattered by the very thing that once shattered you. And because you survived, you will know what to say. Not cliches, not empty slogans. Life, wisdom, hope. Your restoration will become their roadmap. That is why quitting was never an option. Too many people are connected to your obedience. Too many lives are waiting on your testimony. Too many breakthroughs will begin when you decide to fully heal. This is larger than you, always has been. God blesses people to reach people. He restores individuals to influence communities. A river that only collects eventually stagnates. It must flow. What God places in your hands must eventually move through your hands. That includes wisdom, resources, compassion, opportunity, healing. The restored life is not a storage unit. It is a distribution center. And the more freely you release, the more faithfully God replenishes. That is kingdom economics. Give and it grows. Pour and it multiplies. Serve and it expands. The world says protect. Heaven says release. The world says hoard. Heaven says sow. The world says hold tightly. Heaven says trust deeply. And trust is the currency of restoration. You cannot outgive God. You cannot exhaust His supply. You cannot drain infinite abundance. Impossible. That is why restored people become generous people. Not only with money, with grace, with patience, with encouragement, with second chances, because they remember what it felt like to need all of those things. Pain, when healed, creates compassion, and compassion changes lives. Never forget where you came from, not to remain there, but to remain grateful. Gratitude protects restoration from becoming entitlement. Entitled people lose what grateful people steward. Gratitude keeps your heart soft, teachable, dependent, aligned. The higher God lifts you, the deeper your humility must grow. A tree with abundant fruit bows lower. That is wisdom. That is maturity. That is power under control. And that is exactly what God is forming in you, because your next season will require influence. People will watch how you speak, how you lead, how you handle success, how you treat those who cannot benefit you. Restoration is a responsibility. Carry it well. Remember the pit when you reach the palace. Remember the cave when you wear the crown. Remember the valley when you stand on the mountain. Memory protects humility. Humility protects favor. Favor accelerates purpose. And purpose is the final destination of restoration. God did not rescue you merely to make you comfortable. He rescued you to make you useful. Useful to heaven. Useful to people. Useful to the generation assigned to your voice. There is someone who will believe because they saw you rebuilt. Someone who will hope because they watched you recover. Someone who will pray again because your life became undeniable evidence that God still restores. That is no small thing. That is legacy. And legacy is simply restoration multiplied across generations. What God does in you today can bless people long after you are gone. That is the scale of his thinking. He does not think in moments. He thinks in generations. So receive your restoration, protect it, steward it, then release its benefits into the lives of others, because the miracle was never meant to stop with you. One day you will look back on this season and barely recognize the person you used to be, the one who cried through the night, the one who questioned God's timing, the one who wondered if recovery was even possible. You will remember that version of yourself, but you will no longer live there, because restoration does not simply change your circumstances. It changes your identity. It introduces you to a stronger self, a wiser self, a freer self, the person God always intended you to become. This is the mystery. Sometimes God allows you to lose what you were holding so he can reveal what was holding you, that relationship, that dream, that position, that image. You thought you owned it, but in many ways it owned you. Loss exposed the attachment, and exposure is the beginning of freedom. You cannot be fully restored while secretly enslaved. God refuses to decorate prisons. He opens them. That is why restoration often feels like liberation before it feels like reward. Chains break first, doors open second, blessings arrive third. That order matters, because freedom is the foundation of lasting increase. What good is abundance if fear still rules you? What good is opportunity if insecurity still controls you? What good is restoration if your soul remains imprisoned? God goes deeper, always deeper. He is not interested in cosmetic change. He transforms from the core outward. He rebuilds foundations. He rewrites internal narratives. He restores the architecture of the soul. And once that happens, external restoration becomes inevitable. You no longer chase what once defined you. You attract what aligns with you. That is the power of transformation. People will notice it, not because you announce it, but because peace has a presence, confidence has a sound, healing has an atmosphere. You will enter rooms differently, speak differently, decide differently. The same situations that once intimidated you will no longer move you. Why? Because you have been with God in the fire, and anyone who has walked through fire with God stops fearing smoke. That experience changes you forever. There is a holy boldness that only suffering can produce, a calm authority, a settled spirit, an unshakable confidence, not confidence in yourself alone, confidence in the God who carried you. That confidence cannot be taught in classrooms. It must be forged in battle. And you, my friend, have been in battle. But battles create veterans. And veterans do not panic at the sound of conflict. They remember previous victories. They know what survival feels like. They trust their commander. That is who you are now. Not fragile, formed, not weak, weathered, not defeated, disciplined. The enemy expected your collapse. Instead, he witnessed your construction. What he meant to bury, God used to build. What he intended to silence, God amplified. What he designed for destruction became the foundation of your authority. That is divine reversal. And divine reversal is one of God's favorite signatures. He does not merely restore, he reverses. He turns mourning into dancing, ashes into beauty, weakness into strength, scarcity into abundance, isolation into influence. That is the God you serve. No loss is final when God is involved. No ending is permanent when heaven has spoken otherwise. No grave can permanently hold what God has destined to rise. Remember that. Especially when memory tries to drag you backward, because the past can become seductive. Familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar promise. But you cannot drive forward while staring only in the rearview mirror. The future deserves your full attention. And your future is not waiting for a broken version of you. It is waiting for the restored one, the healed one, the aligned one, the fearless one. That person is emerging now, even if you cannot fully see it yet. The sculptor sees the statue before the marble does. God sees your finished form. He knows exactly what he is creating. Every strike has purpose. Every delay has meaning. Every loss has served the design. And soon, very soon, the masterpiece will become visible. You will laugh again, trust again, build again, love again, dream again, but differently, wiser, stronger, healthier, holier. You will not merely recover, you will ascend. People who knew the old you will be stunned. Some will celebrate. Some will misunderstand. Some will envy. Let them. Your assignment is not to explain the process. It is to honor the one who performed it. When God restores you, explanations become unnecessary. Results speak. Peace speaks. Fruit speaks. And the life you live will declare what words never could. So stand firm. Hold your ground. Reject despair. Silence fear. Refuse to negotiate with doubt. Your restoration is not a possibility. It is a promise. And God does not make promises he cannot keep. He is already moving, already arranging, already restoring.
Even now.
Especially now. The chapter you thought ended in loss is about to become the chapter everyone remembers for restoration. Watch closely. He is not finished. Not even close. What was taken will not define you. What God restores will. With your permission, I will now reveal the ending. There are moments in life when silence feels like absence, when delay feels like denial, when loss feels like finality. But heaven never operates on human emotion. God is not moved by panic. He is moved by purpose. And purpose is still alive in your story. What you call the end was never an ending in God's eyes. It was a transition point, a hidden turning, a divine repositioning. You were not abandoned in the loss. You were being guided through it. And everything you thought you lost, God has already accounted for, not to simply return it, but to transform it. Restoration in God's hands is never duplication. It is elevation. It is not what was. It is what should have been. And what should have been is always greater than what was. So hear this clearly. Stop measuring your future with the ruler of your past. It will never make sense that way. God does not restore backwards. He restores forward. Into strength you have not yet felt. Into peace you have not yet known. Into favor you have not yet experienced. You will not recognize the fullness of what is coming by memory. You will recognize that by peace. Because when God restores, your soul will settle in ways your past never allowed. No striving, no chasing, no confusion, just alignment. And clarity will replace chaos. One by one, the pieces will begin to speak. What looked random will reveal itself as design. What looked like loss will reveal itself as protection. What looked like delay will reveal itself as timing. And you will see it, not partially, completely. That is when gratitude becomes overwhelming. Not because everything was easy, but because everything had meaning. Even the pain, even the waiting, even the silence. Nothing was wasted. Not one tear, not one prayer. Not one night of uncertainty. All of it was being gathered. All of it was being accounted for. All of it was being used. And now, restoration begins to speak louder than memory. You will not live as someone trying to recover. You will live as someone who has been rebuilt. Stronger where you broke. Wiser where you fell. Kinder where you suffered. Deeper where you were shaken. And that version of you will carry a quiet authority. Not loud, not forced, but undeniable. Because restored people do not beg for validation. They carry evidence. And evidence is enough. So walk differently now. Not in fear of what was lost, but in awareness of what is being restored. Because the same God who allowed the stripping is the same God commanding the rebuilding. And when he builds, nothing can collapse it. Not time, not people, not opposition, not yours. Past, it stands. It lasts, and it testifies. This is your portion. Not permanent loss, not endless delay, but divine restoration. beyond what you imagined, beyond what you expected, beyond what you thought was possible. And when it arrives, you will say only one thing: God did this, and it will be enough.